Hi, I'm John Waterhouse. Welcome to the Center for Spiritual Living Summer Prosperity Review. We're having an excellent participation in this class this year. We have people who are joining this class from all over the United States, Canada, Europe, Africa, and Asia. So when you do your treatments for increased income, be aware that you are blessing people across the planet who are on the same journey you are to live that prosperous, abundant life of perfect health, perfect wealth, and perfect happiness. And when something happens and you receive increased income, please let me know. Then I can share it with people in the class when we do these recordings. Also, you can send that to me directly. My email address is john@johnbwaterhouse.com. And don't forget that B in the middle of my name. john@johnbwaterhouse.com. Let me know what happens to you and we'll share it. We won't share your name, but we'll certainly share that you've had this success. So I want to share a story of success. My all-time favorite story from increased income classes and programs of the past. There was a couple who read an article that I wrote in Science of Mind magazine a few years back. In that article, I shared the increased income treatment, the same one you're doing every day. And in the article, I guaranteed that if they would recite those words many times each day with great intention and passion for 28 days, that something wonderful would happen. Well, this couple in California did exactly what I suggested, and on day 28, they won the California State Lottery. Could that be something or even greater that could happen to you? Sure, it could happen to anyone. Will it happen? That completely depends on you and your intention and your passion and your absolute certainty that this is your path. Just remember to watch all the classes that are being posted, recite the treatment many times each day, and expect something wonderful. And let's see what happens. And you also may want to buy a lottery ticket if you think that is your path to prosperity. So have a great class, and I'll see you at the end.
Are you ready? Are you ready to have your life change? Yes. Are you ready to have money fall out of the sky? Yes. Are you ready to have so much money that you have to hire people to handle it for you? Yes. Then we're going to do our treatment for increased income together aloud. I, Barbara, know that God is the source of all supply, and that money is God in action. I know that my good is here now. I am so rich and so full that I have an abundance of money to spare and to share today and always. I know that true prosperity includes perfect health, perfect wealth, and perfect happiness. This word which I speak in faith knowing now activates universal law, and I accept the results. I bless all that I have now, and I bless the increase. I bless all the others in the increased income program of our class, and I know that we now prosper together in every way. I give thanks for this good, and so it is. Again, I, Barbara, know that God is the source of all supply, and that money is God in action. I know that my good is here now. I am so rich and so full that I have an abundance of money to spare and to share today and always. I know that true prosperity includes perfect health, perfect wealth, and perfect happiness. This word which I speak in faith knowing now activates universal law, and I accept the results. I bless all that I have now, and I bless the increase. I bless all the others in the increased income program of our class, and I know that we now prosper together in every way. I give thanks for this good, and so it is.
Welcome back. Yay. I am not Barbara Waterhouse, but I married her. Didn't I do good? Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's far from that being the truth. But I am delighted that you all are here today. I'm delighted that everyone is watching. And now what I'm going to do is go sit on my stool. Not so much because I'm lazy, but because this is the 3rd week anniversary of my spine surgery. Hey, and I'm up and at it, but sitting on a stool is cushy. Maybe I am a little lazy, but they say that lazy people create ways to make life better for all of us. So whatever works, whatever works. So we are in our 3rd class. And if you haven't heard this about Barbara and I, Barbara is of course referred to as the rock star of this center. And I'm referred to the professor. So whatever that means, whatever that does, what we've been doing in the second half of the class is kind of looking at some principles that we can apply to our lives. And really the first half of this class has been about unlearning. Yet I want to say something before I go into unlearning about something Barbara brought up in her talk, and that was about Dr. Muhammad Yunus. Dr. Muhammad Yunus, not to correct, but just to clarify, did not start Mountain Microenterprise. He came to kind of bless it and see what we were doing here. But he did create the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh and changed the entire economics of one of the poorest countries in the world, and was the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. And I call him my dear friend because in my office I have a picture of the two of us. Many years ago when he came to town, and I bought his lunch, and he wanted to buy my lunch, and I said absolutely not. I want to be able to say that I bought lunch of a Nobel laureate. That was many years before that happened. I was actually in a hotel room in Charlotte one morning getting ready to get on a flight, and there was an announcement on the news that he had received the Nobel Peace Prize. And I think everybody in the hotel could hear me whooping and hollering. I'm so excited for him because he absolutely turned that around. And he really did it with many of the principles that we teach, rising people out of the thought that they had to be impoverished. And it was through his work that it has definitely been demonstrated. In fact, this is how it goes. If you lend money to a man, the man will prosper. If you lend money to a woman, her village will prosper. Because women work in networks. It's not that men are wrong or bad, but their idea is they will build their prosperity, and there's nothing wrong with that. But women have a tendency to focus on something larger and more communal.
John?
Yes. Come into the picture. There you are.
Why did he win the Peace Prize for starting a bank?
Because he changed the world.
So what is the relationship between prosperity and peace?
You can't separate them.
He won the Peace Prize because poor countries go to war. Countries that prosper don't go to war. So they gave him the Peace Prize, not the prize for economics.
He didn't get the economics prize.
He got the Peace Prize because he changed the poorest country, the poorest of the poor, from being poor to being prosperous. And that works for peace.
Yes, because you can't separate peace and prosperity. There you go. All right. Feel free to jump into the screen anytime. Anytime. Okay. So we're going to start with a review. There's some folks in the room that haven't been with us, so I had a real sense that was going to happen tonight. So I want to go back quickly through the principles that we've been talking about. And we start with that prosperity principle 1. And what it says is your prosperity will grow only to the extent that you will grow. I've been sitting with this for the last couple of weeks. And as I said a few minutes ago, what we were going to do in the first half of this class, as I'm creating it, is unlearn the things that haven't worked for us. And we're going to do a lot of talking about that in the next few minutes. But what I've got with this one is that it says that prosperity will grow only to the extent that you will grow. So I've changed it a little bit. I've changed it to this. Your prosperity will grow only to the extent that you will let go. You will let go of the things that no longer serve you, the ideas that you've collected since you were born about how life works. And it's just logical that any child would observe what's going on in their family unit and think that that's the way the world works. You know, a lot of kids don't know they're poor until they go to school and they see kids that are rich. They think that what they have is normal. And if they live in an impoverished community where everybody's poor, they think that's just the way life is. You know, so it's like you accept what you see. Children are wide open. I mean, not that children don't have opinions by a long shot. I know that children have opinions. But what they observe, they tend to accept to a great degree. Okay, so the idea of letting go of those old ideas that your parents or your teachers or your friends or your babysitters or whoever when you were young put into your mind by you observing what they said or what they did, it may be time to review some of that stuff because a lot of that stuff isn't working. And it's worth reviewing. And the stories that I hear again and again are about people that learned how to make money, but they never learned how to be prosperous. They're really different things. A lot of people know how to make money. I was an example of that in my 20s and 30s. I made a lot of money, but I wasn't prosperous. I was hanging on by a thread. I went out and bought a nice car and lived in a nice house in a nice neighborhood, but I struggled with it to keep it up. Even though I was running a company that I created that was selling millions of dollars worth of product, and yet I couldn't find a way to make my life work. My investments, what I did with the money that I got, I wasn't handling it. I didn't know how to do that. So I was going by what I had learned as a child and living at that standard, even though I was making, I don't know, 100 times more money than my dad ever made, but yet I was living at a subsistence level. You got to have the whole picture. So there's things to let go of, and that's why I've changed that first principle. The second principle that we looked at was, if you want to change the outcomes in your life, you must first change yourself. That is fundamental. All of the work that we're talking about in the part of the class that I'm doing, and I agree, and with Barbara as well, is that you must change what's going on inside of your thinking, inside of your consciousness, if you want to see an outside change. You cannot try to change it on the outside. And you'll remember that we used this model where we talked about how these three elements exist in any form of creation. This is the model. It goes by different names, but for the purpose of this class, we're using seed, soil, and plant, meaning that you start with a seed. And the seed has extraordinary potential, but it has to be planted. Well, obviously, hydroponics might argue that, but it has to germinate. Let's say it that way. It has to germinate for it to turn into the plant, and it needs certain things to germinate. It has to have water. It has to have light. It has to have the nourishment, because the nourishment, the seed itself will nourish itself to a point. But then it requires that soil, and the soil is the medium that actually allows it to come forward. But the soil does not change the elemental principles or the elemental products of the seed. The soil cannot change an apple seed into a peach seed. Can't do it. It's impossible. The seed determines what is coming forth. So in this model, the seed is the idea that comes from our thinking. And the soil is what nourishes it. And it's what brings it to a place or gives it the environment so that it can come forward and be the plant. And then the plant, of course, can create flowers, which in turn create seeds, which in turn create more of similar ideas. So that goes back to the seed, saying that the great potential is at the point of the seed. The massive potential, not just to create a plant, but to create an endless number of other seeds. So in our lives, every time we have a thought, we have the potential to create that. But looking at this idea of unlearning the things that we've had in our lives, we've planted a lot of seeds that have really turned into weeds. And we've done that because we have observed those around us plant similar seeds and bring forth weeds. And the definition of a weed is a plant that is in a place where it is not welcome. Like a rose bush is a weed in a cornfield. So it's not about certain kinds of plants being the weeds. Any plant can be a weed in the wrong environment. But the idea here is that we're looking at is that we're creating ideas. We're constantly creating ideas. And out of that, we're making choices. And out of that, we're getting results into our lives. And when we like those results, that's fine. But too often, we don't like the results. And we have things in our lives that aren't working. And we have to evaluate that and see what we want to do. And that's what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes. So that's seed, soil, and plant as our purpose. Now we went to the third principle we've been talking about. We spent a good bit of time on this last week, saying that 99% of everything we experience is the result of our personal perceptions. The remaining 1% is circumstances to which we must adapt and adjust. And I made the argument that the only thing I could figure out that really is absolutely in the 1% is when somebody makes their transition, when somebody dies and leaves this world. We don't have any choice over that. Unless we murdered them, but that doesn't often happen. What? So, getting that off the table, the point is that when things happen in our lives and we go, oh, I don't want that in my life. This is terrible. This is just horrible. We cannot look to the 1% for that. It's in the 99%. We created it. We did something to create that. Oh, I didn't create it when that person treated me that way. Well, didn't you create a relationship with that person? Is this really the first time you've seen them act out that way? Probably not. Probably you've seen it again and again. This one just got to you, and you want to make them wrong for it. But we set it up by having the relationship, by allowing it to exist, and receiving the fruits of that. And that's just one tiny example. I could go on and on about what's in the 99% because it's virtually everything. It's virtually everything in our lives. Anyone that failed at business, and this isn't a blaming, it's just a reality. They failed because of the actions that they took. I own an oil field equipment business in Houston, Texas. It was very prosperous as a company. We had 38 employees. We were up to, I don't know, was it around $6 million in sales when it came tumbling down? And it really came tumbling down because of my relationship with one particular company. One company that was buying a ton of supplies through my organization, through my company. A lot of stuff. And when it all stopped and they filed for bankruptcy, I couldn't do anything about it. But I'm not a victim. I chose to sell to that company. And some may argue that company didn't have a great reputation. It didn't have that great a reputation, especially for paying their bills. I had a system for getting them to pay the bills, though. I would go in there and sit in the purchasing agent's office until someone from the accounting department brought me a check. And I would go ha-ha to these people that would complain that this company didn't pay their bills until they didn't pay the bill that I gave them, the many bills that I gave them, actually. So was I a victim? No, I was a participant in that. I took a risk in doing that. And it didn't turn out the way I wanted it to turn out. Okay, but I took the actions that created that. So I cannot blame that other company. And as I think I mentioned when we talked about this before, when one of my colleagues who was who had much experience, more than me, in business, running businesses. He said, would you like to take your company and recreate it to do other things? Because you've got these employees and you've got all this equipment and you do certain things, you want to do something else with it. And without even thinking, I looked at him and said, no. And it wasn't really because of the company that had done that. It was that this wasn't my calling in life. This wasn't fulfilling me. It was creating a lot of money that I was wasting, but it wasn't thrilling me. I wanted to do something else. And so I ran away from home. I did. I went all the way to Australia, where it took me all of 3 days to find my first real spiritual teacher. Wasn't looking for a spiritual teacher, but some guy stopped me on the streets of Sydney and said, want to come to a lecture? And the weird thing was, he's looking at me, and he's looking into my eyes so much that I'm a little uncomfortable. It's like he's peering into my soul. What's this about? And then I went to the lecture and ended up in the middle of the thing, demonstrating with this man I'd never met this exercise about love. I was hooked. I wanted to know everything this man knew. So I spent the next year learning everything he had to say. And you might say, how could you possibly hear everything he had to say? Well, interestingly, right before I left, he gave a lecture. His name was Ken Dyer, and I was just always enthralled, and I was in the room every time he spoke, and I was enthralled with everything, and I soaked it up like a sponge. And I became a member of the staff there, and I worked with other people. And it was just exhilarating for me to be there. And this particular lecture, after I'd been there just about a year, I'd heard this lecture before. So I went to one of my colleagues and I said, I remember Ken giving this lecture. And this guy had been around for years. And he said, yeah, he's got about a year's worth of lectures and he starts over. Within a couple of weeks, I had to leave. So did I get it all or what? You know? It was perfect. And one thing I learned from him is never think that you're a victim. You're always right exactly where you need to be. And for a time, I had to deal with the fact that I thought I'd left all my problems behind in the U.S. But frankly, I hadn't, because I was still there. So I had to work out this idea that I wasn't the problem and that I could create whatever life I chose to create. And he was a really good teacher about that. So when I came back to the United States and borrowed my mother's car, she was at work all day, so I just used her car during the day and picked her up and took her home. I managed to drive by that center in Miami and went in, and a woman comes out from the back, and I said, "What science of mind?" Because that's what the old dilapidated sign out there said. I hadn't even noticed the beautiful, pretty sign that said Center for Positive Living. I saw Science of Mind and go, "What's that?" And I went in and I asked this woman, "What is it?" And I don't know. I don't know what she said, but she invited me to come, and so I did. And you know the seat that I sit in our sanctuary on the front row? That's the seat I sat in that sanctuary. That was my seat for the next 5 years. And of course, the woman that came out from the back was Barbara. So I've learned that I live in that 99% world. It's my world. I create it. You know, and when on occasion that 1% comes up, and if I think of anything else that I think is in the 1%, I promise to let you know. But right now, I can't think of a thing. I remember when my mom passed over in St. Joe's Hospital, and how it shifted my life. I didn't sob or cry, but it was just surreal to be in the world with her not being in the world. And all I could do with that is adapt. All I could do is adjust my life to her not being there. That's what I did. Everything else that's going on in my life is my creation, whether I like it or not. But the beauty of seeing the difference is the stuff I don't like, I can change it. Absolutely, because life is malleable. Nothing about life is solid. As Barbara was explaining, the particle and the wave, and that constant shifting back and forth can instantly change what we're experiencing. So if we believe that something is so, with all of our being, it's so. I was telling the folks in Raleigh yesterday about Willard Fuller because this was his seat. And I carried it over there because I didn't know if they had one like this that I could sit in. They did. They had a director's chair, but still it gave me a moment to talk about Willard and about the experience I had in Miami when Barbara invited him to come to our center. I was pretty new at the time. Willard was about 6'6". He had a full white beard, shoulder-length white hair, and he spoke with a Louisiana accent. He was an ordained Baptist minister. And he was probably in his late 70s, early 80s when I met him. And he came and shared these stories about his healing ministry and about all the people that had instantaneous healings in their mouths. It's great stories, and what a storyteller he was. He had me just totally enthralled, and everybody in the room. And the room was pretty packed that day. I suppose the sanctuary in Miami held about 300 people, and it was pretty packed. And he had us all come up, and he did his blessing on us. And his blessing was he touched the sides of our faces just gently and said, "In the name of Jesus, be thy every whit whole." He was a Baptist. And that was it. And you go sit down. And I was told to bring a mirror and a flashlight, which I did not do. But the woman sitting next to me, Sharon Doyle, did bring them. And I asked Sharon before I went up, before it even started, I had one filling in my mouth. I got it when I was 19 years old. I have great teeth. No problem. One filling. So I showed her. I used them so I could see with the little mirror and the light. And I only have one. And she said, great. And so we did the thing. We heard the stories. We went up. We got blessed. I'm sitting in my seat. Something weird taste in my mouth. I said, Sharon, let me see that mirror again. And I look in there, and there's 4 fillings. There's 4 fillings on my mouth. So what do? I start laughing with my mouth wide open. Like this, and not noticing that all over the room these kinds of things were happening, where people were having these instantaneous healings. And after that happened, I'm dazzled by this. One woman had railroad track, this was in the 80s, had railroad track braces in her mouth, and she came into class on Monday night, the next night, sobbing because she had no more braces. The orthodontist had just told her she had at least a year more of that, and her mouth was suddenly perfect. There was a kid in the room, a 12-year-old, that had a ton of fillings in his mouth. When they looked in his mouth, his teeth were perfect. They didn't have a single filling. Did I get 3 of his? I don't know. But you got to wonder, how is this even possible? And what some people have said about Willard's work was that people are just being hypnotized by him and they're making up all this stuff. Well, I don't think so. There was too many cool things that happened that were just beyond that. So what is it? Some kind of angels coming in here and doing voodoo on us? What was it? How did it work? And then I finally figured it out because, I'm indicting Tony. Barbara's husband, all of his fillings turned from amalgam silver to gold. And every morning, Tony would go into the bathroom and open his mouth and look at his fillings. And about 8 months later, he walked into the bathroom one morning and opened his mouth, and they had all gone back to silver. And the first words out of his mouth were, "I knew that was going to happen." So what I figured out is that Willard was simply getting us ready for our own change, our own shift. And that we were creating that ourselves. We listened to the stories, we got the blessing, and we changed ourselves. Wow. Why not? Particle, wave, particle, wave, particle, wave. Anything can change. My favorite story of that kind of a healing in this center was from the woman that had gone for a mammogram. she felt the lumps that were in her breast, but her doctor was going off on an event and saw her mammogram results, but couldn't get a hold of her. So he went off over the weekend to speak at some conference, came back and said, oh, I've got to call her and let her know what's going on because she's got cancer. Asked to see the mammogram slides or whatever again. There was nothing on there because all that weekend our practitioners had treated her into wholeness and worked with her, and she accepted that healing. Now that's weird when it not only changes in her breast, in her body, but it changes on the friggin' mammogram. How does that work? Particle wave, particle wave, particle wave. Anything can change. So what I want you to know tonight is anything in your prosperity can change if you can change what you're thinking about it. But you got to work at that. You absolutely have to do it. So we're going to go from the 99% very quickly. Look at this. We also talked about the 4 planes of perception. We figured that physical is in that plant part of that model we had, that mental, emotional, and spiritual are all in the top, in the seed part of it, the invisible part of it, and that we have absolute control over our mental faculties, our mental thoughts, our emotional feelings, and our spiritual awareness. We have absolute control over that. And we have control over the physical, but only through the other 3. You can't look at the problem that you see in your life and change it at the level of the problem, at the physicality of the problem. You must look at yourself. You must look at your thoughts. That's where it happens. That's where it initiates. So remember this one? Yep. Thoughts to feelings, to actions, to results. So here's the thing to know about thoughts and feelings, is that once you have a thought comes first, and you evoke a feeling with that, an emotional response, you attach it with super glue to that thought. And they are inseparable at that point. Every time you have that thought, it comes with the feeling, right? Then you take that and you do something with it. Based on believing that that thought is real and those feelings are real, you take some action and you get a result. Now, where does that happen where you don't want it to happen? Something's going to go wrong. Oh no, something's going to go wrong. I'm afraid that something's going to go wrong. So I take some action thinking something's going to go wrong. How many of you think it's going to happen? Something's going to go wrong. So the result is something you don't want, right? It works every time. But it also works every time if your thought is something that moves you forward. If the feeling you attach to is a feeling of joy and excitement and fullness of life, then you take some action on that and you're going to get a result that works for you. And even if it's not exactly the thing you wanted, it's better than you had before. It's a step. You learn something, so you move forward with it. That's how it works. So the point here is, it's our job to become conscious of what we think, because it all starts at the level of thinking, right? So we have some new principles for you tonight to attach to all this. Here you go. It's a big one. Prosperity principle 4. If your desire to be prosperous comes with deep-seated fear, anger, or a need to prove yourself, you will either never achieve true prosperity or the money you create will never be accompanied by true happiness. So if you're motivated by fear or anger, you're trying to prove something. Fear and anger, I would see are the ones that really deny you of prosperity. And the idea of trying to prove yourself, you might actually get a bunch of money, but you won't be happy. Anybody ever know anybody who had a lot of money and wasn't happy? Sure, they're around. There's all kind of people that have lots of money and they're not happy. Well, what's the good of that? I mean, because when we think about being prosperous, we think it comes with happiness, right? Well, it doesn't if you're doing it from the idea of you're angry or you're afraid. It just doesn't work that way. And I want to make sure that I speak to this carefully. How many of you would say that your motivation for being prosperous is based in fear? Raise your hand if you think that. Okay. How many of you have a motivation to be prosperous? Make sure I say it right. Your motivation to be prosperous is based in having security. Got a few hands? Okay. Yeah, I have some news for you. That if your point is to be secure, it's based in fear. Because anyone who is seeking security is facing the idea of not being secure, which is a fear-based idea. So I want to invite you tonight to let go of the idea that it's all about security. It's all about abundance. It's all about living in the flow. It's all about that dynamic action of what I call spirit that actually moves us into something greater. When we use that as our motivation, believing in ourselves, seeing that we have a gift for the world, and each one of you do, whether you know it or not. You have some gift you bring to the world like nobody else can. And when you apply yourself to that, joyously, lovingly, you don't have to be secure. You can know it's okay. I find something fascinating with Edwene Gaines, who keeps coming up tonight in a good way. One of the things she told us was, she used to travel all over the world, speaking mostly in spiritual communities like this. She shared with us that she actually worked with a group of cyber experts out in California, but that was a rarity. Mostly, she goes to spiritual communities and she shares her basic teaching is tithing, and she's been doing this for 40 years. And she's made a good life at that. And her thought was, well, when I set all this down and retire, what's going to happen? Well, she's kind of done that. She's kind of retired now. Actually, she gave this center all of her inventory of all of her prosperity products. So we're working on our distribution plan for that. You all may be included somewhat in that at some point. But what she shared with us is that all she's doing now is talking with spiritual leaders on the phone and coaching them. That's all she's doing. And she sets up appointments, and they call her, and then they send her a gift, a tithe or a donation, whatever you want to call it. And she says she's making more money now than when she was traveling. That's a consciousness of prosperity. Edwene doesn't think about being secure. She has a gift to give the world, and she gives it every single day. So, she's our model. She's the one that knows how to do that. But she's not different than the rest of us that way. Any of us bring a gift that is exclusive to us, that we bring in a way that is joyous and loving and exciting and interesting. Please don't get caught up in wanting to be secure. It will limit your ability to grow. I think that's what I want to say about that. Prosperity principle number 5. The only way to change your level of prosperity is to permanently reset your internal rules about money. And don't tell me you don't have rules, because everybody got rules. First of all, I want to talk about where your rules come from. They come from the people that were in your life mostly when you were young. Most of what they taught you, you don't actually remember per se. But it has been what looks like indelibly burnt into your consciousness. Not so. But you've used it when it came up. The way if I asked you all what you believe, not a one of you could tell me everything you believe. But if I set up a certain scenario, you would know exactly what you believed about that. So you have to be actually a belief has to be evoked out of your subjective mind into your conscious mind based on the circumstances before you. But you've got them, and they've always been around. They've been around since you were young. You were impressionable when you were young, and things happened. So You either in your life have embraced things that your parents believed, or you're absolutely against the things your parents believed, which sounds like a solution, but maybe not. But let's think about some of the things that you may have observed. Now, some of it is things they said to you, and they very clearly told you what they thought about money. Every parent does. And a lot of it's pretty ugly. Barbara referred to it when she was talking about the rich people, because they're dirty rich. Chances are they're probably clean people, but their money is dirty. So they're dirty rich people, and things of that sort. But then there's the internal stuff in the family. There's the stuff that you hear when your parents argue. There's things that happen. For example, some parents argue about money. The kids hear it, and then at some point there's a divorce. You know, arguing about money is the biggest thing that couples do. But what if your parents get divorced? And what do you presume from that about money, if that's what they always argued about? Maybe that money leads to arguing, leads to unhappiness, leads to disaster. Maybe that's the way it's seen. Maybe it's that one of your parents lost their job and the family had to cut back. Maybe the family had to move. Maybe there was the house, the family home was lost. All of that stuff leaves a scar. I mean, there was a whole generation that went through a thing called the Great Depression, which everybody was touched by. And it took 2 generations to kind of grow out of that before that prosperity could really show up again in our culture. And it has, and it does, and we're in one of those great times right now. You know, we're living in that first world environment where we have great opportunities. We still have to use them. Great opportunities is great potential, which one of my colleagues once said that if someone tells you got great potential, what they're saying is you haven't done anything. So great opportunity is great, is lovely until you do something with it. You know, doesn't mean much until then. Perhaps it was that you didn't have a lot when you were a kid and you got teased by schoolmates for the clothes you were wearing, or you got called stupid or poor or something like that. That leaves scars on your soul. You got to grow out of that. You got to learn, you got to unlearn those things. And do you walk around saying those things? Of course not. But you may be living according to those ideas. So what you must do is you must unlearn them. And that's where we're going tonight. This unlearning of those things that you don't even remember happened, that you're not consciously holding on to, but they're still there. They're still in your psyche. They're still limiting what you can do in your life. And this is your chance to turn them around. That's where we're going tonight. Perhaps you lived in a family that didn't take a lot of vacations, that really was kind of miserly with the money, there was some fear around not having enough, which led to some of those arguments. Any of that stuff leaves its mark. And that's the kind of stuff we want to move beyond. I also want to talk just briefly on the idea of relationships and how this works. And I know some of you are partnered in this room, and some of you, there's only one member of a partnership here. And many of you may have already done this, but really what I want to invite you to do with your partner, if you have a partner that you live with, whether you're actually married or not, if there's a person in your life like that, is to actually schedule some time where you sit down and talk about your history of how you deal with money. And what your deep, really their rules in your consciousness about money, and what their rules are, what their important things, what their history is, so that you can have that open conversation. Because what happens is that you have a reality and they have a reality, and what you want to create is a common reality that works for both of you, which eases a lot of pressure on a relationship. And what we're talking about tonight, of course, is money and being prosperous and working together, because that's the focus tonight. But you can do this on any topic. You can do this in any part of your relationship, but if you're in a relationship, I really encourage you to do that, to actually come to a place of having similar ideas around that. Barbara and I have worked on that together, and it's been beautiful. One of the rules that we have, because Barbara has more conscious oversight of the finances of the center, and I have conscious oversight of our personal finances. And one of the things that happens is having cash. And although, you know, most places you can use a piece of plastic to get what you want, but there are places where cash really is important. So Barbara and I have a deal, is that she carries a $100 bill in the back of her wallet, and she has whatever other cash she has. And if there's ever a moment that she goes and uses that $100 bill, she tells me, and I replace it immediately, so that she always has that $100 bill. And that makes me feel good. It makes her feel good. And we have a system. So there's always money in her wallet. And that's the way I want our relationship to be, is that she never has to want for anything. God knows she puts the energy and effort into creating the money, and she should have, and yes, she could go to an ATM at any time. She has that card. But this is a system where I get to support her, and it makes me feel really good. Not that it's my money, it's our money. But to play that kind of game, she's going for the mic. Here we go. Nope? Okay, all right, I know, we're getting close. Okay, so do I have another one? Yes, I do. We're going to go hit one more here. One more. Each thought you have is either an investment or an expense. Isn't it? Many times, I have said something not so pleasant, and Barbara would look at me and go, "How many hundreds of dollars did that cost you?" And it may not be attached to an actual transaction at all, but the idea is, if you follow this idea, what you're thinking is investing in where you're going, or it's taking something away from it. It's impossible to be at one point all the time. We are either moving forward or we're moving backward. We have so many thoughts during the day. How many of them are really getting us where we want to go, and how many of them aren't? So we have homework. Let's see here.
Do you need runners?
Yeah, I do.
Runners?
You go, Deb. You go that way. Let me get one here. And everybody get one of these. So let's quickly go through this and see what you got. And if you're watching online, this will be available. It'll be called Homework Week 3.
Friday,
It'll be available Friday.
because Devon's gone.
I know, I'm thinking what day, what's the date? Doesn't
I don't
matter.
know what today is.
Yeah, you don't know what today is. What does it matter? 3 things to work on here. Number 1, what ideas did your parents say that influenced your current understanding of money? Dig deep. Please do not go, "My parents always said nice things about money." Come on. Work on it. Really look for it. And this isn't about making your parents wrong. It's about looking at what's down inside, what was said to you. Now, just parents saying things is one step. The second one goes to a different one. Describe things you observed about the way your parents dealt with money. What did they say to each other? How did they act with one another? Don't worry about it. I'll get it. We'll get it later. What did you see them do? If they argued, what did they argue about? What was being said? What was important to them? Okay? That's the second one. The third one is describe a seminal event from your childhood that impacted how you relate to money. Most people had something happen. Mine was that I went to my mom once, and it was summertime, and my friends were going to a movie. I didn't have any money. And I went to my mom and I asked her for money for a movie. And she pulled out her wallet, and I watched her take every bit of money she had and give it to me so that I could buy a ticket for a movie. And that always stuck. And it was like, my first thought was how generous. But then I realized over time, that's all the money she had. You know, she didn't have extra money. She gave me what she had. And it wasn't much. And I always had that sense of not much from that. And even in that moment of generosity, it left me with the thought of, there's not much money in my family. And there wasn't. And it really hit me home. So that's what I would write in that spot. Then we get to the core element of this. Here's what I want you to do is I want you to create a transitional statement from an ineffective belief and action to an effective belief and desired result. And it goes like this. I no longer indulge in the debilitating act of blank, which in the past I used to blank. What did I use it to do? How did I justify myself with that? The second sentence is instead, I now, and what do you do now? What do you believe now? How is your life now? Yes.
Debilitating act.
Yeah, and it's important that it's a debilitating act because it doesn't work.
Is it an action or is it a thought? Or
An act is an action or a thought.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah. So mine that I use from this. I no longer indulge in the debilitating act of self-judgment, which in the past I used to keep myself small. Instead now, I know who I am. I understand how important my work in the world is, and I live up to it. That's the kind of thing I want you to find here. Something that brings you to the place of who you are so that finding the money in your life, it becomes so secondary because you are so on purpose to be who you are. You've cleaned up that basement of stuff that has been there holding you back all these years, and you can move forward with who you are. So that's your little bitty homework assignment for the week. How do you feel about that? Work? What's that? You can do it as often as you want. If you want to refine it and do it over and over again, keep doing it. That's fine. However you want to do it as a process. But really work on making that statement, and don't limit it to this paper. Write the whole thing out somewhere and own it. Own it. Put it somewhere where you have to see it. Memorize it and make it work for you. Once again, we're over time. I'm going to turn it back to Barbara.
Thank you, John.
I love you guys.
Wow, what a wonderful class. Thank you so much for being here and enjoying this good work. Let's close this out by saying the increased income treatment together aloud. Here we go. I, John, know that God is the source of all supply and that money is God in action. I know that my good is here now. I am so rich and so full that I have an abundance of money to spare and to share today and always. I know that true prosperity includes perfect health, perfect wealth, and perfect happiness. This word, which I speak in faith knowing, now activates universal law, and I accept the results. I bless all that I have now, and I bless the increase. I bless all the others in the increased income program of our class, and I know that we now prosper together in every way. I give thanks for this good, and so it is. Great. Have a fantastic week. We'll see you next week. Bye now.